So this is going to be quite the departure from my normal YouTube content. If you guys follow me on Instagram, you might have noticed sometime around October I decided to start acquainting myself with leatherworking, with the end goal to incorporate it into some of my larger projects, furniture, possibly sculptures. So I started out really with some simple stuff like these card wallets, which I'm going to show you how to build today. And that was in October. By December I was having a hard time keeping up with the amount of orders that I was receiving for card wallets, like these snap wallets here, tote bags. I would like to do some like duffel bags and roll top backpacks. So I received so many requests through Instagram and through my email asking me how I got started and whether or not I was going to put out a video showing people how they can get started, what kind of tools do you need. There's so much information out there with leatherworking that and it's so specific depending on what you're trying to make, whether you're tooling leather, whether you're sewing leather, what kind of stuff you're making. So I'm just going to show you guys what I use and to build the projects, and we're going to start today with these card holders, and the idea is that we'll graduate into some larger projects and I'll show you how to do that. So this isn't going to be the most entertaining video I've put out, but if this is something that you're interested in, hopefully it will provide you with enough information to get into the hobby yourself. Alright, so I've put together what I consider to be the essential leatherworking tools. I'm going to put a link in the corner that will take you to a page where you can find where to purchase all of these items. I think all of this can be had for somewhere around $100 to $150. Pretty much none of the items are really expensive in their own right, it's just when you add them together. But first we have a self-healing mat. This one's 23 inches by 17 inches. I wish I would have gone larger. I would recommend getting the largest mat that you have space for. This will be really useful when you get into larger projects and just trying to be efficient with cutting up your sides of leather. Makes it a lot easier to get large straight cuts. So first up we have a cork backed ruler. The cork keeps this from slipping around when you're trying to make your cuts. Scratch awl. This is what you're going to use to trace all your patterns and templates onto the material before you cut it. Technically this rotary cutter isn't an essential item, but I definitely would not want to be without it. Use this in conjunction with a straight edge. You get perfectly straight cuts, and it cuts through even like 8, 9, 10 ounce leather very easily. So I highly recommend them. I think they're like $15. X-Acto knife. This is what you're going to use to do radiuses and curves and corners. Let's see, now we're on to our actual sewing or stitching equipment here. These are diamond stitching chisels, 3mm. I think that's the spacing between the prongs. This is a 6-prong, this is a 2-prong. They make everything from 6 all the way down to 1, and they're all useful. However, the idea again here was to create the most minimal toolkit to get by. So I like the 6-prong because you can, you punch through it and you can overlap two or more, however many prongs you need to overlap in your previous punches, and that'll assure that you're punching in a straight line. So the 2-prong is nice for going around corners because you can leave one in your previous punch and it'll keep your spacing correct when you go around radiuses. So essentially if I had to only pick 2 of the punches, I picked the 6 and the 2 punch. Also for the needles, you're going to need some harness needles. These are really inexpensive. You get like 20 or 25 of them for a few bucks. So as far as thread is concerned, this is the Tandy waxed braided thread. This is definitely the easiest stuff I've ever worked with. I think it's like wax impregnated or something, so it doesn't even feel like it's waxed. It's very silky, it threads easily. Really nice to work with. I'm also a big fan of main thread. This is .035 waxed main thread. This is a little bit stiffer, a little bit harder to work with, but one of the things I like about main thread is they come in almost every color you can imagine. So if you like contrast stitching, I really like this stuff. Let's see, next up we have a scratch compass. You're going to use this to trace around the borders of your pieces for guide your punches. Also, you can do some little accent lines in your leather. We'll do both of those things in this project. Let's see, rubber cement, you're going to use this to pretty much think of this as a temporary glue to hold your pieces together while you're stitching them. And this is a edge beveler. This is a number 2. This is the size that I recommend. What this does is once you glue your pieces together, you have a hard corner. Well, not necessarily glue your pieces together. If your leather is going to have a 90-degree edge like this, you're going to come in with your burnisher, and it's essentially going to knock off that corner and give you a nice round edge. So let's see here. This is a slicker. This is what you're going to use for burnishing your edges on the leather. Let's see here. This is a vegetable tan leather here, unburnished. This is what a burnished edge looks like. Pretty much gives it a nice gloss and hardens it up. So this pretty much only works on, in my experience, pretty much only works on vegetable tan leather. It doesn't really do much on oil tan leather. Another option, which I typically prefer, is just canvas. Plain canvas works really well for burnishing. However, when you do that, you're also going to want some sort of burnishing fluid. Pretty much everybody makes their own brand, and in my experience, it's all pretty much the same. So there's a lot of different options out there as far as that liquid goes. I do have a few optional items that I highly suggest. This is just a rubber mat that I use for punching over. So, because you don't want to cut into your mat with the chisels. So it doesn't have to be rubber, but you know, you want something that you can easily pull the chisels out of. These binder clips are really nice for when you glue your pieces together. You can just kind of lock them in place. This is called a stitching pony. This is the cheapest one that money can buy, and I wish I would have spent more money. It works. That's why I haven't upgraded it yet, but I think this is the cheapest one Tandy has. They make a nicer one that's I wish I would have sprung for. Just the threads are a little tight on here, and one of the things that you actually want something that has some weight on the base so that it doesn't rock back and forth. But what this does is it holds the piece up for you, because when you're saddle stitching, you're using both of your hands, so this keeps the piece in the same spot. So like I said, I'd spring for the nicer one if you can afford it, but this certainly gets the job done. And last but not least, some sort of leather conditioner. You really only need this on the vegetable tan leather. It just kind of protects it. It'll help darken it. I have 2 different templates we're going to use for the projects here. So first thing you're going to want to do is kind of block out your shapes. You can do whatever design you want across the top, but first of all, cut your squares out for the card holder, 3.5 inch tall, 2 5/8 inch wide. That's going to be the front and the back. There's 2 pieces here, the front and the back of the main card holder. Then a smaller one that's 2 3/4 by 2 5/8. This is going to be your front panel here. So get those blocked out, and then you can do whatever design you want across the tops. I have this kind of curvy one, and I have some slanted ones here. The reason I don't like leaving them square, especially at first, these card wallets are very stiff, and it's nice to have somewhere to grab onto the card, especially with the vegetable tanned leather. I mean, if this is straight across, it's really tricky to get your fingers in there and grab onto the card. So by having some sort of relief, it really makes it easier to grab your card. And as for the materials, we have 4-ounce vegetable tan leather. That's what we're going to use for one. Also have Kodiak leather. This is really nice. Has what's called pull-up on it. It's the oil tan leather, so it'll wear really nice over time and kind of have a nice rugged look to it. And last but not least, we have the Granger Excel, which is, I think, the nicest leather that Tandy sells. This is very, very high quality stuff, and also ages very well. So that's what we're going to be working with today. So the first thing I have to do is trace out the template onto the material. Nice thing about these card holders is they don't use that much material, so I'm lucky enough I can get all of this just out of some of the scraps that I had laying around. Alright, there's one. It's really important when you're doing this to make the cuts as clean as possible, or as accurate as possible. It'll save you a lot of time sanding if all your edges line up. Make sure you keep a sharp blade for these. It makes it a lot easier. You'll know when it gets dull. Should cut through this stuff pretty easily. Alright, so those are all the pieces that we're going to need for that one there. I'm going to cut out the other two. I have the pieces all cut out here. Something else that's really handy is these little binder clips. And right now, although I'm going to have to take them apart to glue them, like I was saying earlier, it's really important to try and get everything as accurate as possible, because sanding leather takes time, and it's just easier to get the cut right in the first place. So I just want to make sure these all go together well. Vegetable tan leather is a little bit thicker, so it's actually easier to sand and work on the edges. The oil tan stuff is a little bit flimsier, so just makes it a bit trickier. There's specific rubber cement for leather, but I have used just like Elmer's in the past and I haven't had any issues. I don't know if there's any difference or not. So first off, I'm just going to glue this main card holder together. Nice thing about rubber cement is it does come undone. You're pretty much just using this to hold things in place while you're stitching. It's not supposed to be permanent at all. So if you get a little bit extra in the actual card section, it's not a big deal. It'll come off and loosen up. So I usually give these about 10-15 minutes to kind of cure and harden up before I do anything with it. This makes life infinitely easier having everything in place when you try and punch it and stitch it. I've let these sit about 15 minutes and I'm going to glue on the front panel. But before I do that, and I forget this sometimes, since I'm going to round over all the corners on everything, if you wait until after you have it glued up, it's really hard to get this in where this ends. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that right now before I glue this face piece on. And like I said earlier, that just kind of rounds the edges over. Alright, because it's just really hard to get into, it's really hard to start right there if you already have this glued down. So another tip, sometimes with this like oil tan leather, or essentially anything that's not vegetable tan, sometimes it helps the glue stick a little bit if you just scuff up the surface. This is I think 320, but probably anywhere like 220, 300 something, just to give the rubber cement something to bite onto. Alright, so it's been 15 minutes. Now the next step is to get all of your edges lined up perfectly. This is really what makes a big difference in how good your finished product looks. These little nail files actually work really well. just to make sure you get everything straight. So what I'm going to try and do is just sand it down until it all essentially looks like one piece. Another way I do this, if you have a spindle sander, that works really nice. Just get some fine grit paper on there and you can go around, and it does this pretty quickly, especially like this one. When you're getting in those curves, it makes it really quick and easy. So one of the things also is the inside, like the suede part of the leather, sands away a lot faster than the top grain or like the skin. So a lot of the times you'll sand away on the inside and you'll have like a little flap, and that's one of the things that when we come in with the burnisher here in a second, that'll take that off. Now, actually I'm going to round the corners first. And they make little templates. You can use washers to get them perfectly round, or it's crazy that by just doing a couple of straight cuts and just take off the corners, it's actually fairly easy to get a decent round corner just by making a bunch of straight cuts, and then you can come in with the file, sandpaper. Alright, come in with the edge beveler and just going to trim off round those corners over. I do find that you can kind of get a little bit of control, not a whole lot, by how much you angle it. Seems like the less angle you put on it, the less it takes off. Doesn't really matter as long as you try and be uniform. It's not a big difference, but so I actually just realized that on the veg tan piece, I actually forgot to burnish this inside lip here, so I'm gonna have to take the glue off. Where's my edge beveler? The other ones I'm not going to burnish, so it's not a big deal. Alright, so I use the beveler on that corner. This is a quick slick, which is, I think they're all, pretty much all the slicking liquids are all more or less the same. This is just what I happen to have. And I like to just use a Q-tip and roll the edge. Now you can use a slicker and you just go at it until it darkens. I actually prefer, most of the time, I find that canvas works a little bit better. It's faster. Alright, so you can see that there. That's what burnishing does. It'll give it a nice glossy, hard finish on the edge there. So it's really hard to do that when it's glued to the piece, so I'm gonna have to re-glue that really quick. So now we're gonna use, I have all the edges cleaned up, we're gonna use this scratch compass to make some marks for where we're gonna punch our stitching holes. One of the tricks with vegetable tan leather is if you just get it damp a little bit first, your marks will be a lot more visible. Alright, I have the width on this set to 1/8 of an inch. I'm just going to trace around the perimeter here. Trying to go slowly around the corners. This is the trickiest part, is to work around the corners. And this is why you want to get the edges all squared before you trace this. And as far as where you start, I just make a mark 1/8 from the edge. So that's where I'm going to start and stop my stitching. And it doesn't hurt if you can't see your marks very well. You can go around it again. This is a pretty small radius, so it's actually, the corners are going to be fairly square on this one. Same thing with the other materials here. My starting and stopping points. So first we'll do the vegetable tan one. As far as punching these, this is one of the occasions where vegetable tan is actually a lot harder to work with than the oil tan stuff. That's just because it's really stiff. So the issue is usually not necessarily punching through it, but pulling the punch out. It really likes to get stuck in the vegetable tan leather. So one of the things that I like to do when I punch is, let's see, this is just leather conditioner. I've used paste wax in the past, but just anything to kind of just barely touch it in there. Anything, any sort of like lubrication will help you remove the chisel once you punch it. So I'm just going to start right on that mark that I made that's 1/8 of an inch from the end. You don't really have to worry too much. Hopefully you can see it. If you punch through this corner here, it doesn't really matter. The thread is going to hold it all together, so don't really worry about that if it's right on the edge. So, actually, where's my hammer? And I go all the way through. That wasn't too bad. Now I'm going to overlap 2 into the previous. And this is also something you want to take your time and make sure you're going straight. These are actually new chisels. Once you, I feel like the more you use them, the easier they come out of the leather. All right. Actually, I didn't go all the way through. Okay, now I'm going to switch over to the 2-prong. Because I have this little corner coming up here. Alright, so these don't always come out perfectly, so what I usually do is start on the other end and try and meet in the middle, and if they don't line up perfectly, you just kind of split the difference. I'm just checking to see if those are gonna, and they don't. They're pretty close though. Another thing as well, when you're punching these, try and make sure that you're keeping the chisel straight up and down. If you tilt it too much one way, you can, obviously that's going to affect where it comes out the backside, so you just want to pay attention to how vertical you're keeping your chisel. Alright. I'm just going to kind of try and go right in the middle there because the holes don't line up, so trying to get it. That looks about alright. All right, so we have that guy punched. I'm going to go ahead and do the same with these two. Like I said, it's a little bit easier with the oil tan stuff. So I have all the stitching holes punched on here. I'm going to show you how to thread the main thread because it's more difficult to thread. The Tandy stuff actually goes right through the eye of the needle. You just cut it at an angle and it goes right through. The wax main thread's a bit trickier. As far as length goes, I think I read somewhere that you're supposed to do 3 times the length of what you're sewing. I'm just going to go like 1 arm span, I don't know, ish, so probably 5 feet should be enough. It's not the end of the world if you... blade just fell out of my knife. It's not the end of the world if you run out of thread in the middle. You just start a few threads back and carry on, but I prefer not to, so I always cut off a little bit extra. This stuff is too thick to fit through the eye of the needle, so what you do, grab a sharp blade, run it a little bit and just scrape off. Just want to thin it out a little bit. I'm going to grab one of my needles here. Pull through, it's at about 2 inches or so. I'm going to come over. I'm actually going to stick the needle through the middle of the thread, come back, so you have 1 loop. Now I'm going to do the same thing again, the smaller loop. So you see there, it's like almost like a little sine wave. So now all you do is pull it over the eye, and that should lock it in place there. I want a little bit long, but it should be fine. Then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, the other end of the thread here. So now we're going to start stitching this. I have a stitching pony. This is going to hold the piece in place while I work on it. That's one of the reasons I would suggest going with a nicer one, is the screw is a little bit, it's not very smooth, and plus I think you want one that's, I didn't know this when I first bought it, but you want one that has some weight on the bottom so it doesn't move. So I'm going to take the thread here. Now this is just something that I like to do personally. When you end the stitch to lock it, you back stitch, so you go back over your previous stitches twice to lock it in place. So I like to do the same thing when I start it, just so that the thread looks the same at the beginning of the stitch as it does the end. So I'm going to go through, see, that's the 3rd hole in. I'm going to grab the 2 needles and I'm just going to pull, and what that does is it centers the thread, so each needle has the same amount of thread with it. So you'll find a pattern I like to start with. My left hand goes through, I'm going to pull it through until I'm past the double thread there. Now I'm going to pull that on one side. My right hand, I'm going to go through the forward side here. One thing you want to do is, as you're pushing this needle in, your second needle, pull through with your first thread. And what that does is that assures that you're not going through the first thread. So it sounds confusing right now, but when you have these in your hands and you're doing it, it makes sense. What you don't want to happen, what you're trying to avoid is, say you have this one through the hole here, you don't want to stab this one through that needle in the middle and then pull it out, and your threads will be passing through each other, so you'll get a big knot. So I'm just going to do the same thing again. Pull on this one to make sure that I'm not penetrating that other thread. And you just want this to be taut. You don't want to pull it really tight or you'll get like a wrinkle in there. You don't want it to be loose either. You just want to take the slack out and just a little bit of tension in there. Now the same thing going back. Issue here is you just kind of have to poke around a bit. Try not to go through your existing thread. And same deal here. I'm just going to try and use this to pull through. There we go. And one more time, then we're through. All right. So now it's just a redundant process. We're just going to go all the way around here. You always want to start with the same hand just to keep your stitches consistent. That'll suck that right in. Alright, so we're all the way to the last hole here. So same way I started, I'm just going to go back, kind of wiggle around and make sure I don't come out through one of the previous threads or stitches. Get that through. This can be tricky sometimes. Sometimes I keep a set of needle nose pliers because there's just so much, there's enough material in there that sometimes it can be difficult to pull it out through the other side. See if I need them this time. All right. One. And if you do go through the other thread, just pull it out and wiggle it around until you come out clear. All right. Pull that tight. I'm just going to cut it off as close to the leather as I can. Alright, so I went ahead and finished the stitching on these. One of the last things I'm going to do is hammer down the threads, and that'll kind of sink it down into the leather so they're not exposed. That way it doesn't catch on stuff as easily. And I know since a lot of my subscribers are woodworkers, you might have some brands like branding irons or touch marks. I'm going to heat this guy up, and it's different than wood. You don't get it as hot. I pretty much get it just hot enough to where you can't keep your fingers on it, and it's more about time and pressure than heat. So you just want it, like I said, hot enough to where you can't hold your you can't keep contact with it. I always do a test panel first on a piece of scrap, make sure I have the temperature right. Alright, heat it up just a bit more. Two of them. Now for the vegetable tan stuff, it's a little bit different. You actually have to get this damp first. So I have my little sponge here. You don't want to get it too wet, just kind of coat it once. And again, I'm going to do a test piece here. Kind of let it soak in for just a little bit. test it out here. Yeah, that's so actually that's what happens when it's too hot. Still a little bit too hot. That's about right there. There we are. So you don't, as far as maintenance goes on these, you really don't have to do anything with the oil tanned or dyed stuff. You know what? Actually, I have to burnish this edge first. I forgot to do that. You can see the difference there. I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of these off camera. Alright, so I went ahead and burnished all of the edges on this one. And something else you can do, add a little bit of detail. If you want to, you can scribe a little line across the card slots. So I think I was getting around to saying it earlier. One of the things, as far as the maintenance goes, you don't have to do anything with the tanned or dyed leathers, but with the vegetable tan stuff, you want to put some sort of finish or conditioner on it. I like this Aussie leather conditioner. This just kind of helps preserve it, and it will darken over time. This bracelet here is actually the same material as this. It's vegetable tan. Just sunshine and time will darken the vegetable tan leather. I think it develops probably the nicest patina with age. So there we go. The last thing that you're going to do is take something flat and go in here along all the seams and try and stretch it out a little bit. There's probably still some rubber cement in there that you want to open up. These are all going to be very, very, very tight at first. I actually already did this, but the battery died, so it's kind of loose, but you're going to have to really fight to get it in there for the first time. And you can actually go in there again and try and open it up. But eventually they'll break in, and you can get about 2 to 3 cards in each slot at a time. Thank you so much for watching this video. Hopefully some of you found the information useful. Let me know what you guys think about this. If you enjoyed it, if you'd be interested in seeing me kind of progress into some larger, more intricate leatherworking projects, let me know. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments. I'll do my best to answer each one of them. Again, I'm going to put a link in the corner that'll take you, that'll show you all the products that I used in this project, as well as where you can purchase them. Also, I do sell these card wallets along with some other merchandise on my website, zhfabrications.com. I'd also like to thank Tandy Leather and IsoTunes for sponsoring this video, and last but not least, my Patreon supporters. I would not be able to do this for a living if it weren't for your help. So thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.